My New Year's resolution for 2020 was to normalize my relationship with food. I have some eating addiction kind of problems. So I kind of plotted out a chart of how addicted I was to food during my most of my adult life. So the chart begins in 2000. I was 13 years old. So this is how addicted I was to food over the last 20 years. As a teenager, I was addicted to a lot of junk foods, in particular soda. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was also addicted to MSG, which is why I loved a lot of flavored potato chips. But I quit sugar and MSG almost overnight. What I didn't quit was overeating. I still ate big portions of healthy foods for many years, and I was only forced to cut back due to budget. Now, in 2008, I moved out of my family's home to permanently now to pursue my PhD. And when I first got to Rochester is a much bigger city than the small town that we were living in. We lived in a suburb of Pittsburgh. And for the first time in my life, I actually saw what some of these healthy foods I had been hearing about on the internet were, right? Quinoa, various forms of seaweed, ostrich meat, and a bunch of other things, right? Unfortunately, I still had a fear of flying, so I was still limited to all the foods that I could find here in the United States. Okay, so I settled down at my PhD program, and then I got a girlfriend. And for a while, I didn't want to spend too much money on food because I wanted to go out with my girlfriend. And we broke up, and I replaced her with food. And that continued for most of the rest of my PhD program and into my first job. Eventually, things started to settle down. Now, in 2014, I moved to Seattle, and I got a big euphoria. In that first couple of weeks, I continued to eat nonstop, and that continued for a good of 6 to 12 months, if I remember correctly. Every day, I was just celebrating the fact, because I didn't like New York. I spent some time in New York, and I hated it. And then, now this one's an interesting one. Eventually, I started competing in the Computer Olympiad, and also in 16, early 17, I wanted to invest as much money as I could into silver. Silver prices were at a historic low at the time, $12, $13. And so I was eating very little so I could, I was still keeping myself well nourished. Unlike over here where I was almost starving myself to death, here I was eating the bare minimum. And eventually that went away. And what's really interesting about this part is that this is actually two different parts. First, I broke up with a girl and I replaced her with food. And then I met another girl and I was worried that I would marry this girl and I would never have time alone again. So I went out to celebrate all the fun things I love to do alone, including binge eating, and which is what got me in trouble. I lost a couple of jobs during this run-up over binge eating kind of problems. I talked about that in the other video. And so in 2020, I made a New Year's resolution to normalize my relationship with food. And when I started doing it, I realized how much I hated food because it would get in the way of my jobs, my hobbies, my girlfriends. And the more I did it, the more I hated it. 2 weeks ago, I actually vomited because I took one of my fasts a little bit too far. And hopefully this one is here to stay. Right? These two, I didn't really like eating less during these two, right? I kind of did it to compromise for other things, right? This one seems like something I actually like, except for the fact that I went a little bit too far the other day, right? So that's my history. I guess you could say the swings are getting a whole lot wilder over time, right? It has how many year cycle does it? It has like a 4 or 5 year cycle.